إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله فصل اللهم وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد، يقول المولى عز وجل: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. My dear Muslim brothers and sisters in Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to have taqwa of Him as is rightfully due to Him. And part of this taqwa of course is fearing Allah Azza wa Jal in all instances, in all cases. And of course, taqwa is so important that Allah Azza wa Jal has made it the purpose of our fasting. And of course, the month of Ramadan in which we fast is coming up very quickly. Today is the 11th of Sha'ban. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. He says, O you who have believed, prescribed upon you is fasting, as it has been prescribed upon the people before you in order for you to achieve taqwa, in order for you to achieve this honorable state. And part of this taqwa is that we have to train ourselves to do it, which is why Ramadan is so important as a concept, that it becomes like a school, like a training class. This is why many people, they call the month of Ramadan Madrasatu Ramadan. It is the school of Ramadan, because there are things that we learn in Ramadan that we don't learn anywhere else. And some of the things that we learn in Ramadan is how to properly learn the ahkam and the fiqh of our acts of worship. Meaning, a lot of people might not sit down for a lecture to learn anything about the religion during the entire year, but in Ramadan or before Ramadan, they immediately start asking questions. Ya Sheikh, does this break my fast? Is this okay for me to do in Ramadan? Is this okay if this happens, if this is okay? And so on and so forth. When they have no interest perhaps throughout the entire year, but in Ramadan, it almost forces them to go and seek out knowledge. This is one of the benefits of Ramadan that perhaps many of us do not realize or think about. Ramadan teaches us that working a little bit now can save a lot of tiredness later on. It teaches us that if we are just thirsty for a few hours during the day, Allah Azza wa Jal will perhaps, if we are sincere in our actions, protect us from the thirst on the day that its length is 50,000 years. That if we stand for an hour in Taraweeh at night, Allah Azza wa Jal will perhaps protect us from standing on the day that its length is 50,000 years. That if you do, in comparison, it seems like a small deed. For many people, standing up for an hour in prayer is a very long time. Fasting an entire day without water is a very long time for some people. Yet in perspective, when we talk about the Day of Judgment and standing for the account in front of Allah Azza wa Jal, it becomes insignificant in the long run. And so Allah Azza wa Jal is perhaps teaching us that if you work right now for a little bit, you'll actually save yourself so much more energy later on. And this is how this life works as well. We know that when people work hard in their life, they can retire very comfortably later on. But when people take it easy, they relax, they spend and they waste all their wealth perhaps, they can't retire that comfortably. And they have to continue working until the end of their days. So Allah Azza wa Jal teaches us many lessons. He teaches us to befriend the Quran, because many times we only befriend the Quran during Ramadan, and throughout the rest of the year the Quran or the Mus'haf is perhaps neglected. He teaches us to be precise in our acts of worship, meaning that at Fajr we stop eating and we begin our fasting. And as soon as sunset enters, we can eat. It's precision. This is why in Ramadan, we do not fast before Ramadan starts. Yawm al-Shak, it's haram to fast. This is why many scholars have said it's haram to fast a day or two or even 3 before Ramadan starts. Because you have to be precise. There's a precision in our acts of worship. Just like our intention should be precise, it should be for Allah. The way that we do our acts of worship should also be precise. And this is why ending Ramadan, it is also haram to fast right as soon as Ramadan is ending. Meaning the day of Eid, we know that it is haram to fast. And this is in order for us to exactly know, this is when I start, this is when I end. This is why it's also, of course, incorrect to say, I'm going to stop 10 minutes, eating 10 minutes before Fajr in order to be safe. This does not exist in Islam. There's no such thing. It's exact, it's precise. Everything else, as soon as you start your salah, Allahu Akbar, it's precise. There is a moment right there in which your salah begins and which your salah ends. This precision should also extend into the other elements of our lives. The way that we live our lives should of course be in a precise manner. This is one of the lessons of Ramadan. One of the most important lessons, and this is the lesson that I wanted to really expand on, is the lesson that Ramadan makes us all into teachers. Makes us all into callers to Islam without even realizing it. None of us sign up for this. Yet despite this, you are perhaps obliged to become a teacher in Ramadan. Whether you have children yourself, because ultimately you will have to teach them. Your children will start asking you questions. Why do we have to stop eating? Why do we have to stop drinking? Why are we waking up so early to eat? I don't want to wake up early. Why do we have to wait until the sundown? You become a de facto teacher. And you have to explain these concepts. And you have to be able to relate things to them. Not only this, it doesn't stop, of course, at your children. Let's say you have in your workplace, you were going out to lunch with many of your co-workers before Ramadan. And then afterwards they call you and they're like, hey, would you like to go out to lunch with us? You're like, I'm sorry, I'm fasting. You're fasting? What is this? And now you have to be able to explain what fasting is. By default now, you become a da'iyah. You become a caller to Islam. And the question is, will you be able to properly explain it? Will you be able to properly represent Islam? Because the reality is, if you have come to live in a non-Muslim country, you are representing Islam without even realizing it. I know many of us did not sign up for this task, to be a representative, yet you are a representative, whether you like it or not. And so when they tell you, oh, you're fasting, what is this? You say, fasting is this, and you go on. You explain it. You're in school, for many of the younger ones, and you're no longer frequenting the lunchroom. And they ask you, why aren't you eating lunch with us anymore? You're like, well, I'm fasting. Fasting, what is this? You have to explain fasting now. You have to explain Islam. You have to explain Tawheed. You have to explain what it is to believe in Allah Azza wa Jal. Because it's not an act that's devoid of intention. It is 100% intention. Because nobody knows whether you're fasting or not. You can pretend to be fasting in front of the people and then go home and eat as much as you want. So you have to explain, well, I'm actually doing it because of my Lord and my Creator. And that we worship Him, and this is part of worship. So now you become a da'iyah. And the da'wah, the calling to Allah, wallahi, is one of the most honorable deeds that a person can do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. Who is better in speech than the one who calls to Allah and then does good deeds and then says that I am amongst the Muslims? Many times we feel, unfortunately, ashamed to let people know that we are Muslim. When wallahi, it should be the opposite. You should be proud that you are Muslim. We feel ashamed that we are Muslim many times because of our own shortcomings. But wallahi, trust me, all of us have shortcomings. And these should never stop you from properly representing Islam. Wallahi, if the people knew our shortcomings, perhaps nobody would come to Jummah and listen to us. But we're all human. This is part of the whole concept. And so do not let your shortcomings stop you from claiming that you are Muslim, being proud that you're a Muslim. Even when, subhanAllah, we live in an environment in which there's a lot of hate, there is a lot of Islamophobia, there's a lot of violence perhaps as well towards Muslims. Because if we shy away from all of these things, perhaps that will increase. But when we show the people the true nature of our religion, wallahi, it'll stop eventually. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Because they'll see that the character, the behavior, the morals, the standards, all of these things are excellent. This is why I wanted to share a few instances from the Quran about how this da'wah was very effective. Because this verse that we quoted says, number one, that you're calling them with your tongue. And then number two, وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا, meaning he's doing good deeds. You're showing it in your actions. The first example is Yusuf alayhi salam, when he was put in jail. A person can say, if you're put in jail, you're put in a difficult situation, you need to focus on yourself and ignore everything else. Yet Yusuf alayhi salam did the exact opposite. Despite him being in a very difficult situation, he actually went out of his way to do more good. And this is why when the two people came and they had their dreams and they wanted to ask him about them, they chose him out of everybody else in the jail. Why? Because they said, "Inna lanaraka min al-muhsinin." Indeed, we see you that you are one of the good doers. He was doing good. And this is why they trusted him. So when a Muslim is automatically behaving righteously, wallahi, people will come to you with their problems without you even realizing why they're coming. Because they sense that you're a good person. You stand up for something well. And many people have seen this. When they behave in a certain manner, people will automatically trust them and not knowing why they trust them. But then look at Yusuf alayhi salam and his intelligence. The first thing that he tells them, لا يأتيكما طعام إلا نبأتكما بتأويله قبل أن يأتيكما. He says, first off, don't worry about your dreams. I will tell you everything about your dreams that you need to know. Then he explains, he's telling them, don't worry about this. Let me explain to you another concept. He says, ذَلِكُمَا مِمَّا عَلَّمَنِي رَبِّي. This is from what my Lord has taught me. Because they were probably curious. How do you know this knowledge? He says, it's from Allah. And then he explains to them about Allah. And it goes 3 or 4 or 5 verses down. And all he's doing them is teaching them about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. About tawheed. About monotheism. About proper belief in Allah. He says, أَأَرْبَابٌ مُتَفَرِّقُونَ خَيْرٌ أَمِ اللَّهُ الْوَاحِدُ الْقَهَّارُ. He says, are many gods good? Or is it just one supreme dominant God better? Of course, when you think about it like this, we know the answer. He's asking them in order for them to understand properly Tawheed. And then after all of this, perhaps they accept. And then he tells them, this is the dream that you have. But he is properly teaching them. You take the opportunity. You show it through your deeds, but you also explain Tawheed. Nuh alayhi salam, when he was giving da'wah to his people, he was calling them to Allah. قَالَ رَبِّ إِنِّي دَعَوْتُ قَوْمِي لَيْلًا وَنَهَارًا. He says, first off, I have called my people night and day. Unfortunately, they didn't listen. فَلَمْ يَزِدْهُمْ دُعَائِي إِلَّا فِرَارًا. My calling to them only increased in their turning away from me. And then he says, ثُمَّ إِنِّي دَعَوْتُهُمْ جِهَارًا. And then I called to them out loud in public. I did speeches, I did all of these. ثُمَّ إِنِّي أَعْلَنْتُ لَهُمْ وَأَسْرَرْتُ لَهُمْ إِسْرَارًا. And then of course, I tried to make it, very public and of course, very private as well. He tried every way possible to give them da'wah. He did not despair. And this is, why I'm saying this is because the method that you use is perhaps not the same as another person. You don't have to copy what another person is doing in this da'wah. You should better evaluate how best to call to Allah Azza wa Jal. But you should call in whatever capacity it is, whether it's in your own family, amongst your neighbors, amongst your co-workers, amongst your schoolmates, whoever it is, calling upon Allah. And this is what they did. He did it in public, he did it in private, he did it at night, he did it in day. Then he tried to entice them by telling them the benefits of turning to Allah, the worldly benefits before the hereafter. Because many people, they still don't firmly have the belief in the hereafter. So the hereafter is not going to be a main motivation for them. Telling them about paradise and the hellfire, perhaps for a lot of people, might not work because they don't even believe in Allah. So you have to tell them about the benefits of perhaps turning to Allah that have in this world, and then they'll be convinced of the hereafter as well. This is why he says, فَقُلْتُ اسْتَغْفِرُوا رَبَّكُمْ إِنَّهُ كَانَ غَفَّارًا. Then he says, I told them, what was the message? Ask Allah for forgiveness. Ask Him for forgiveness because He will forgive you. And then, يُرْسِلِ السَّمَاءَ عَلَيْكُمْ مِدْرَارًا. He will send upon you the heavens with rain, full of water. Perhaps they were living in a place where there was a lot of drought. They needed water. He says, look, if you want to solve the solution of drought, turn to Allah because He's the only one who can bring about rain. وَيُمْدِدْكُمْ بِأَمْوَالٍ وَبَنِينَ. And He provides you with wealth, money. If you're poor, turn to Allah. Ask Him for forgiveness, He'll give you wealth. If you need children, you're not having children, turn to Allah, ask Him for forgiveness, He'll give you children. And then of course, وَيَجْعَلْ لَكُمْ جَنَّاتٍ وَيَجْعَلْ لَكُمْ أَنْهَارًا. This is in the hereafter. هذا في الآخرة. He says He will make for you jannat, gardens, and of course rivers. Because of how you call them. In the third incident, inshallah, that I will mention about da'wah, is the righteous man in Surah Yasin, where he comes. And Allah Azza wa Jal narrates his story after talking about the prophets that were sent, where Allah sends them a few prophets, not just one or two, and they call upon their people, and their people end up torturing and tormenting and punishing these prophets for merely calling them to the worship of Allah. And they did not like it. But then a man who's not a prophet, he has nothing to do with the prophets, but he heard about their message, he liked it, and he comes. He's not even from that city. And he goes to them. من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى. They said from the far parts of the city, a man who was, of course, trying to, he's hastening towards them in order to call them. He's like, look, what you call upon, will it help you in front of Allah? It will not. Call upon Allah by Himself. And he tries to explain them. He says, look, I have nothing to do with these people, but I'm telling you, listen to their message. Look at their character. Look at what they hold. And subhanAllah, in the end, they ended up killing him. Allah Azza wa Jal does not mention the killing. He mentions that immediately, as soon as the person dies, Allah Azza wa Jal gives him paradise and forgives that person his sins, who believed in the messengers. And then after this, he says, قَالَ يَا لَيْتَ قَوْمِي يَعْلَمُونَ. He says, I wish that my people knew what happened to me. بِمَا غَفَرَ لِي رَبِّي وَجَعَلَنِي مِنَ الْمُكْرَمِينَ. From what my Lord has forgiven me, and He has made me amongst the honorable. Despite the fact that they killed him, despite the fact that he died, he was still, subhanallah, very concerned for the guidance of his people. And he says, I wish they knew what happened to me so that they can also join me here in forgiveness and in finding this paradise and in finding this bliss that Allah Azza wa Jal has given me. Look at his care and his concern for his people. May Allah Azza wa Jal give us the similar concern and similar care and make us amongst those who call to Allah upon righteousness. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الخلق وأشرف المرسلين سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد, our own Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is an excellent or perhaps a perfect example of how to properly call upon Allah Azza wa Jal. And of course, if we look about it, if we look at his life, we see that every waking hour he spent it calling to Allah, teaching the people about Allah Azza wa Jal, and not despairing, never despairing. He would call upon the people to worship Allah during the Hajj season, in the markets, in the streets. He would visit people in their private homes. He would call about them on the tops of mountains. He would call upon them when he was traveling, when he was not traveling, visitors, everybody he met. He would tell them about Allah. He would tell them about Tawheed. He would tell them about righteousness and doing good deeds. In fact, it culminated when the Prophet ﷺ goes to the people of Al-Ta'if. And of course, we know how they, subhanallah, expelled him from there. And they injured him, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and they hurt him so much so that he says, I found myself, subhanallah, walking, and he did not know, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, even where to go, until he found himself, of course, in the valley of the Tha'alib. And we know the famous incident in which Allah Azza wa Jal sends him the angel, Jibreel, and the angel of the mountains, and he tells him, look, you can get permission to, of course, destroy these people from what they have done. And he, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, despite this, says that I hope that Allah will extract from them a righteous lineage, meaning their children will be better than them. His forbearance to them, his patience upon the calling. This is a key. So the formula, and this is of course not a complete formula, there are many other elements to it, but we have said, calling upon Allah with your tongue, calling upon Allah with your actions, having patience upon this, trying every single way to do it. Because like we said, there's not a single way. Nuh alayhi salam was an example of this. He's trying at night, he's trying in day, he's trying different ways in order to call them to Allah. But in the end, the message is the same. worship Allah, associate no partners, do righteous deeds, stay away from the bad. And this is why his whole life, like we said, was this. And the Sahaba, of course, carried this out. They sent letters to every king that was there on the earth, to every part of the Arabian Peninsula, and of course outwards as well, calling them to the worship of Allah. This is what Ramadan, of course, does to us. May Allah Azza wa Jal help us to reach Ramadan and to make us amongst those who achieve our goals during Ramadan, and to make us amongst those who are able to call upon Allah with righteousness and to this glorious guidance. With this, inshallah ta'ala, we have a few announcements to make about Ramadan. So the first is that we have an iftar sign-up sheet outside. You'll see it on the bulletin board. If anybody wants to sign up for the iftar, to sponsor it and so forth, please do so. Of course, we know that the reward of feeding one fasting person, it's as if you have gotten, of course, that reward as well. And it's of course similar to the reward of giving da'wah. When a person is guided upon you, this is better for the person than humur al-ni'am, than of course the red camels. And this was the most expensive, perhaps, item that a person could buy. And so, similar to this, feeding a person in Ramadan, you get the reward of that fasting without, of course, the person who fasted, his reward being diminished in any way. And this is Allah's mercy upon us. The second is that we have the summer camp for the children, that the sign-up is going on right after Jum'ah, inshallah ta'ala, and we also have sign-up tomorrow. If you have children that are between the ages of 6 to 13, and in fact we also can accommodate ages 4 and 5 in the daycare program, please do so. More information is going to be at the table outside, and I'm encouraging, of course, everybody to sign their children up for this. And of course, last, tomorrow, inshallah, we have a unique, perhaps, project that hasn't been done, perhaps, in a capacity similar to what we're trying to do, which is a video project that's meant to also become a da'wah project. Meaning we're trying to teach people about Islam in a very innovative way, a different way than perhaps what is done, in order to reach an audience that perhaps won't seek out lectures or won't seek out the masajid more so. And so if anybody is interested, this is going on tomorrow. It's a video project here at Masjid al-Rahman between the hours of 1:30, and we'll be here up until Isha, inshallah ta'ala. So if anybody wants to come and participate in this, even if you don't have any experience making a video, this is not a problem whatsoever. As long as you have the proper intention and you have a willingness to work, inshallah, this is all we need. عباد الله إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت وسلمت وباركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين وأذل الشرك والمشركين أعداءك أعداء الدين ربنا اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وإسرافنا في أمرنا وثبت أقدامنا وانصرنا على القوم الكافرين ربنا لا تدع لنا ذنبا إلا غفرته ولا هما إلا فرجته ولا دينا إلا قضيته ولا حاجة من حوائج الدنيا والآخرة إلا قضيتها ويسرتها برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون اذكروا الله يذكركم ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون وأقم الصلاة